It was Thanksgiving in Charleston. The Montgomery home smelled like rosemary and smoked turkey, just like it always did. The china was polished, the candles were lit, and the table looked like it belonged in a Southern Living magazine. It was the kind of dinner where everything looked perfect. Oh, but everyone at the table knew better. We made it halfway through the meal pretending nothing was wrong. My mother, Caroline, passed the sweet potatoes like she hadn't spent the last month avoiding my calls. My brother Ethan complimented the stuffing. Even his girlfriend, Alyssa, tried to smile her way through the tension. But I could feel my father watching me, like he was waiting. Then it came. "So, Lena," my father said, swirling the wine in his glass, "how are things going at Columbia?" I set my fork down, my chest tightened. I had rehearsed this moment in my head 100 times, but now that it was here, my mouth felt dry. Everyone else kept eating, but the air around me froze. "I'm not there anymore," I said quietly. He blinked. "What?" "I withdrew," I said. "About 8 months ago." The silence that followed was louder than any scream. "You what?" His voice cut through the room like a blade. "I left law school," I repeated, this time looking him in the eye. I wasn't happy. I realized it wasn't the path I wanted. "You what?" He said again, louder. "Are you kidding me, Lena?" I shook my head. "No, I'm not." He slammed his hand on the table. The plates jumped. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I do," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. And it wasn't easy. "But, no, you don't get to stand there and act like this was brave or thoughtful. This is selfish. You threw away everything I worked for. Everything our name stands for." Ethan looked down at his plate. Alyssa stared wide-eyed. "My mother." She didn't say a word, just kept her eyes on her wine glass like she was trying to disappear into it. "I didn't throw anything away," I said. "I chose something else, something that feels right to me." "Feelings?" he sneered. "That's what this generation is about, right? Feelings over facts. Lena, do you have any idea how many people would kill for the chance you just threw away?" I wanted to yell. I wanted to cry. But I knew it wouldn't matter. "I know you wanted me to follow in your footsteps," I said. "But I need to find my own." He laughed, bitter and sharp. "You want to find yourself? Fine. Go do it on someone else's dime." My mother still hadn't said a word, not even a glance in my direction. Ethan stayed frozen. "Richard," Alyssa said quietly, "maybe we should." "No," he snapped. "If she wants to throw away everything we gave her, she can walk out that door and never look back." I stared at him, waiting, hoping maybe for some sign that he didn't mean it. But there was nothing in his face but anger and disappointment, a kind of disgust I don't think I'll ever forget. "Get out of my house," he said. "If you walk away from this family, don't expect to come back." For a second, I couldn't move. Then I stood, pushed my chair back, and walked to the front hall. I picked up my coat and grabbed the duffel bag I'd brought with me, just in case. No one followed me. No one called out. The night air hit me like a wall when I stepped outside. Cold, damp. Still, I walked to my car, hands shaking, throat tight, my mother's silence ringing louder in my ears than my father's words. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time before I started the engine. That was the day. Stop pretending to be someone I wasn't. People like to say Charleston is a city that doesn't forget its history. That might be true. But in my family, history wasn't something we just remembered. It was something we were expected to live up to. My father, Richard Montgomery, built his law firm from the ground up. Montgomery and Pierce, one of the most respected family law practices in the state. In Charleston's social circles, that meant something. The name carried weight, legacy, reputation. And from the time I was old enough to walk into his office, was made clear, one day I was going to help carry that name forward. Both of us were. My older brother Ethan was practically born in a suit. By middle school, he was quoting legal cases at the dinner table. By high school, he was winning mock trial competitions like they were pickup basketball games. My dad didn't just love him, he respected him. Cat was even more valuable in our household. I was different, quieter, less polished. I didn't like confrontation or being in the spotlight. I liked questions that didn't have just one right answer. I liked things that grew, plants, ideas, communities. But I learned early on that in our house there was a right way to be, and then there was everything else. I remember being 15, sitting in the family room with a stack of LSAT prep books on one side of me and a folded-up National Geographic tucked inside my hoodie. I'd sneak glances at the magazine whenever my dad left the room. Articles about rising sea levels in the Pacific, solar farms in sub-Saharan Africa, profiles of women leading green initiatives in communities no one ever talked about. That was the world that made my heart race. But to my father, it was all noise. When I got to UNC Chapel Hill, I finally had some breathing room. I enrolled as a political science major, just close enough to law to keep him pacified, but filled my electives with environmental ethics, sustainable agriculture, and climate policy. I started volunteering with clean energy nonprofits on weekends. I spent one spring break helping install solar panels in rural Alabama. That trip changed something in me. The work was hard, hot, messy, but for the first time I felt like I was part of something that mattered. When I came home that summer and told my dad about it, he looked at me like I'd said I wanted to join the circus. "You want to save the planet?" he said, half laughing. "Oh, that's cute, but it won't pay your mortgage." He didn't ask me what it felt like or why I cared. Just reminded me that law school applications would be going out in the fall. By senior year, the pressure was constant. Ethan had already graduated from Yale Law and was climbing the ranks at the firm. The unspoken rule was that I was next. Okay, the plan wasn't even a question. It was an expectation. So I did it. I took the LSAT, I wrote the essays, I went through the interviews, I got into Columbia Law, and when I told my dad, he gave me this nod, just one small nod of approval. It's like I'd finally stepped into the role I was always meant to play. But from the moment classes started, felt like I was suffocating. It wasn't the workload. I could handle that. It was the weight of pretending. Sitting in classrooms discussing corporate liability or estate planning while my mind drifted to energy access in rural villages. Reading case law when I wanted to be reading data on renewable infrastructure. I tried to push through, told myself it was just first-year burnout, that it would get better, but it didn't. It got worse. Every week I felt myself shrinking. I stopped calling home. Stopped calling anyone, really. The only person who saw through it was my roommate, Naomi. One night she found me sitting on the floor of our kitchen at 2 a.m. crying quietly into a takeout container. "You're not broken, Lena," she said. "You're just trying to fit into a life that isn't yours." ... It stuck with me. A few weeks later, I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and stared at the Columbia student portal. The cursor blinked in the search bar like it was daring me to follow through. I typed voluntary withdrawal form, and for the first time in a long time, let myself breathe. After I withdrew from Columbia, I told my family I was taking a mental health break. It was easier than explaining the truth, especially to my father. He would have never accepted that I walked away from law school without a safety net, without a job, without his permission. So I lied. I said I needed space, time to regroup. And to my surprise, they didn't push back. Not because they understood, but because in their eyes I'd already failed. Silence was their punishment. No calls, no check-ins, just distance. At first, that silence stung. Then it started to feel like freedom. I moved into a tiny sublet in Brooklyn, a 6th-floor walk-up with a drafty window and a leaky faucet. I stretched my savings as far as they would go, but they weren't built to last. Most nights, dinner was instant ramen or whatever was on sale at the bodega downstairs. I told myself it was temporary, just a phase. Still, I had no real plan, till Naomi came back into my life. She'd been my roommate during my first year at Columbia. Sharp, fearless, always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. After she dropped out, she landed a job at a venture capital firm and started climbing fast. I hadn't spoken in months, but she reached out after seeing one of my posts about leaving school. We met for coffee in the city. She ordered an espresso. I didn't order anything. I couldn't afford to. "So, what are you thinking?" she asked me, leaning in. "What's next?" I paused. I hadn't said this out loud before. "I want to build something real." Naomi didn't blink. "'Kay, talk to me." And I did. I told her about the solar panels we installed in Alabama, about the people I met who were still living without electricity or access to the internet. I talked about the small schools in Latin America that couldn't run online lessons because they had no stable power source. I told her how I'd been sketching an idea for months. Modular infrastructure kits powered by solar, designed to work in remote or underserved areas. Naomi listened carefully, then she said, "You might actually be onto something." That was the spark. I went home and started building out the idea. I called it Bright Haven Systems, a name that felt like hope, like light. I didn't have much money, but I had time and just enough stubbornness to get started. I taught myself basic CAD software, watched hours of engineering tutorials, and drafted pitch decks in Google Slides. I cold-mailed professors, engineers, and NGOs. Most never replied. A few gave me advice. One guy told me flat out, "You're going to burn out before you even build a prototype." He wasn't entirely wrong. The work was relentless. I'd spend all night tweaking diagrams, only to wake up and realize they didn't make sense. I skipped meals, missed sleep, maxed out my credit card buying cheap materials and 3D printer time from a local maker lab. When I couldn't make rent, I crashed on a friend's couch for 3 weeks, then another friend's futon. It felt like I was held together with tape and caffeine. Still, I kept going. I started pitching to investors, small-time angels, early-stage VCs, anyone who would take a meeting. Most said no. A few said maybe. One guy, mid-40s, all ego, looked me dead in the eye and said, "Cute story, but you're not the next Elon. You're not even the next Elizabeth Holmes." I smiled, said thank you, and left. But on the subway ride home, I cried so hard I had to get off 2 stops early. That night I called Naomi. "Should I stop?" asked her. She didn't hesitate. "Absolutely not. You're doing something most people are too afraid to try. Keep going." I sat with her words long after we hung up. Then, sometime around midnight, I opened my laptop. I rewrote my pitch deck from scratch, simpler, clearer, more focused. I poured every ounce of frustration, clarity, and belief I had left into it. And when it was done, I hit send. The email subject line was simple. Social impact startup seeking seed funding, Bright Haven Systems. I sent it to 5 firms, for I'd already heard of. One was a long shot, Vidian Capital, a women-led VC firm focused on social entrepreneurship. I'd seen them on a podcast once and liked their style. I didn't expect to hear back. But the next morning, just as I was heating water for instant coffee, my phone buzzed. A new email, subject, Bright Haven Systems Inquiry. Body. "Hi Lena, this is Isabella Kim from Vidian Capital. Are you available for a meeting tomorrow?" The Vidian Capital office wasn't what I expected. No marble floors, no intimidating boardroom. Just open space, clean lines, and soft lighting. It was quiet, calm, the kind of place where ideas didn't need to shout to be taken seriously. Still, my palms were sweating. I'd worn my best thrifted blazer and pressed my pants twice that morning. My pitch deck was memorized down to the transitions. I'd practiced in front of mirrors, on subway platforms, and once to a stranger's cat. But nothing prepares you for the real thing. Isabella Kim walked in right on time. Mid-30s, poised, sharp eyes that saw straight through anything performative. She introduced herself with a firm handshake, then nodded toward the conference table. "Walk me through it," she said. "It's just like that." For the next 2 hours, I did exactly that. I talked about infrastructure inequality, about solar resilience in off-grid communities, about modular solutions that could scale fast and ship cheap. I shared my early prototypes, my projected deployment map, my partnerships with nonprofit networks in Central America and the Appalachian Corridor. I answered questions. Lots of them. Some I expected, others I didn't. When I didn't know something, I said so, but followed with how I planned to find out. Isabella listened, took notes, and never gave anything away. By the time I wrapped, my voice was starting to crack from holding it steady so long. She leaned back in her chair, looked at the ceiling for a moment, then nodded slowly. "We're in," she said. 30 million for Series A. I blinked. "Wait, what?" "Conditional on quarterly milestones," she added. "We'll support you with operations and expansion strategy. If you hit your deployment targets, we'll talk Series B next year." I stared at her, stunned. "There's one more thing," she said. "You'll need to establish South Carolina as your state base of operations. That also qualifies you for appointment to the South Carolina Renewable Energy Advisory Board. We can facilitate that." It took a second to land. A seat on the board at my age. I nodded, still barely breathing. "Yes, absolutely, yes." She smiled, extended her hand again. "Then let's get to work." That night I got back to my apartment and stood in the doorway for what felt like forever. Everything around me was exactly the same. Half-eaten cereal on the table, backpack on the floor, the leaky faucet in the kitchen. But nothing felt the same. I sat on the edge of my bed and cried. Not out of fear or frustration, but something else entirely. For the first time in my adult life, I cried because something I built, something that came from me, was finally enough. 6 months later, Brighthaven Systems had a proper office just outside Columbia, a full-time staff, and a prototype facility in development. We'd hired engineers, field coordinators, and local installers from the communities we aimed to serve. Every week brought a new meeting, a new milestone, new reminder that I hadn't just left something behind. I'd created something new. Articles started popping up. Tech South did a feature called Southern Innovation Gets Its Glow. Okay, we were the cover. Then Forbes came calling. I didn't think they'd actually run the piece, but they did. 30 under 30 energy entrepreneurs to watch. I saw my name in print. I saw the photo of me standing in front of a Brighthaven solar unit in rural Kentucky, arms crossed, wind in my hair. I thought about printing it out and mailing it to my father, but I didn't. He still thought I was unemployed. So did my mother, as far as they knew. I was just taking time to figure things out. I kept it that way, not out of fear, not anymore, but because some part of me needed to cross a finish line they couldn't take credit for. When the funding cleared and our next deployment wave was confirmed, I did something just for myself. I bought a house. Not just any house's $7 million oceanfront home in Hilton Head, sleek, modern, filled with light and glass and air, a place that felt like mine. I walked barefoot across the polished concrete floors and looked out at the water and thought, this isn't about revenge. This is about peace. But peace is complicated when your past still breathes down your neck. One night I was sitting on my deck with a cup of tea, watching the moonlight on the water, and I glanced down at my phone. November 1st, I opened the calendar. Thanksgiving was 3 weeks away. 1 year later, I woke up on my own. No alarm, no rushing, no voice in the back of my mind whispering, "Get up before someone needs something from you." Just soft light slipping through the blinds, the rustle of tree branches outside, the distant sound of life continuing, and for once, I wasn't trying to outrun it. I stretched under a comforter I chose. In a room I painted. I'm in a home that felt, finally, like mine. Thanksgiving? It would have been easy to stay home, to spend the day eating something simple and watching the waves roll in from my back deck. But something in me needed to close the loop. Not to win. Not to prove anything. Just to stand in front of them and be whole. I dressed carefully. Navy wool coat, low heels, simple earrings, understated but sharp. I wore my hair back. My posture did the rest. Confidence, not arrogance. Composure, not performance. I looked like someone my father might respect, if only I weren't his daughter. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly the same. Too perfect. Like nothing had ever broken inside. Caroline opened the door. She didn't hug me. Steph stepped aside and said, "You're here?" "Yes," I replied. Ethan was in the living room with Alyssa, who was setting the table. He looked up and froze. Alyssa smiled, warm and genuine. I could already tell she knew something Ethan didn't. My father was pouring wine in the dining room. He didn't look up right away. When he did, his expression barely changed. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said. "I know," I said, "but I wanted to join you, for old time's sake." We sat, dinner began the way it always did. Stiff, formal, everyone performing civility like it was part of the menu. Ethan talked about a difficult case. My father nodded along. My mother passed the rolls. Finally, my father turned to me. "So, Lena," he said, voice laced with something halfway between sarcasm and suspicion. "Still on your little mental health break?" I smiled, calm, even. "Ready?" "No," I said. "I withdrew from Columbia Law 8 months ago." The clinking of silverware stopped. "I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Bright Haven Systems. We design and deploy solar-powered modular infrastructure kits for underserved communities, places without access to electricity or internet. We raised $30 million in Series A funding. And I've recently been appointed to the South Carolina Renewable Energy Advisory Board." Silence, just for a beat. Then Richard let out a dry laugh. "So what I'm hearing is, you dropped out of one of the best law schools in the country to run a vanity project." Ethan stared at me, eyebrows knit. "You're saying someone gave you $30 million? "Yes," I said simply. "Why would they do that?" He asked. "Because they saw something you didn't." Alyssa, still holding her wine glass, glanced at me with an expression that said more than words ever could have quelled parts surprise and respect. She wasn't just impressed. She was taking mental notes. My father leaned back, arms crossed. "You think a title and some startup money makes you successful? Real success isn't about headlines and hobby projects. It's about building something that lasts." "I am building something that lasts," I said quietly. "I've been doing it without your help. Without any of you." He stood up. "You can spin this however you want, Lena. But to me, you're still the girl who walked out on her family. And now you're just trying to make noise, so we'll notice you again. Double quotes, ... I stood too." My heart was pounding, but I didn't show it. "I'm not here for validation," I said. "Came back because I wanted to show you who I really am. Not to change your mind. To stop hiding. ... He pointed toward the door. "You're not welcome here. You made your choice. Leave and don't come back." I looked at my mother. She still hadn't said a word. Ethan stared at his plate. Lissa looked away, so I nodded. "All right," I said. I picked up my coat, took one last look at the table, and walked toward the door. No one stopped me. No one said goodbye. But as I stepped outside into the late November air, I realized something I hadn't expected. This time, I was leaving on my own terms. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled. Some mornings I still wake up half expecting to hear city traffic or the low hum of my old radiator back in Brooklyn. But now it's the sound of waves and the soft ping of emails arriving from halfway across the world. I used to think survival was the goal. Get through the day. Keep your head down. Don't disappoint. But lately, I've realized Dee didn't just survive. Created. Bright Haven Systems had grown faster than I imagined. What started as a rough sketch and a cold email was now a fully operational force. We deployed our first units in rural West Virginia's mall schoolhouses and community centers that hadn't had stable electricity in years. Then came Honduras. Then Kenya. Each time we rolled out a new location, I watched faces light up literally and figuratively. We weren't just giving people power, we were giving them access to education, to opportunity, to the kind of dignity that comes when your basic needs are finally met. And somewhere along the way, people started paying attention. Universities wanted to study our impact model. International NGOs reached out to collaborate. Even state agencies started looking to us for consultation. Then the law firms came. At first, it was subtle, just feelers. A few firms reached out through Brighthaven's general contact form, expressing interest in supporting social impact infrastructure projects. Most of it was generic. Then we started getting more targeted inquiries specifically about pro bono partnerships, focused on energy, equity, and environmental justice. Some of the names surprised me. They weren't just the progressive firms. Few were old-school legacy names, firms that, not long ago, wouldn't have taken a second look at a social impact startup, especially not one led by a woman under 30. My father's world was trying to enter mine, but now it had to come on my terms. One Tuesday morning, I was going through my inbox when my assistant forwarded a flagged grant submission. It was part of my role on the South Carolina Renewable Energy Advisory Board. Was responsible for preliminary reviews of state-funded partnership applications. The grant in question? A $2 million fund to help establish a renewable energy legal clinic pro bono legal support for underserved communities. Transitioning to clean energy? It sounded promising, till I saw the applicant's name, Montgomery and Pierce. I froze for a second. I clicked the file, up came the letterhead I knew by heart. The same serif font, the same gold seal. I scanned through the executive summary. The proposal was polished, professional, even impressive, full of the right buzzwords. Climate resilience, energy accessibility, underserved populations, legal inclusion. It referenced case law and statutes with the kind of precision only a seasoned litigator could produce. And then, halfway down the document, I saw it. Lead applicant, Richard H. Montgomery-esque. My father. The man who once told me clean energy was a waste of time. Who said saving the planet was cute but wouldn't pay the mortgage? It's the same man who kicked me out of his house and told me never to come back now, applying for a state-funded grant to work on the exact issues he once dismissed. The irony didn't make me angry. It didn't even hurt. Not anymore. It just felt distant, like looking through a window at something you used to care deeply about, but now barely recognize. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen. The firm's proposal was detailed but lacked real field experience. There was no mention of on-the-ground partnerships, no community liaisons, no operational plans outside of vague timelines and templated legal service models. It looked like a firm chasing relevance, a strategy shift to match the moment. And it wasn't going to work. Not this time. I clicked over to our conflict of interest policy. As an advisory board member and CEO of Brighthaven Systems, a major stakeholder in the renewable energy grant program, I was obligated to flag any proposal that posed a financial or professional conflict. I hovered over the Submit Conflict Notice button and clicked ... I didn't rush the review. There was no satisfaction in gut reactions, just due diligence. After all, this wasn't personal anymore. This was about standards, integrity, and truth. Montgomery and Pierce's grant application looked solid on the surface, well organized, densely footnoted, full of ambition. But when I dug deeper, when I looked at the substance behind the polish, something was missing. Actual experience. The firm had no history in environmental law, no prior work in energy regulation, sustainability, or even utility policy. Their environmental justice initiative had been launched just 3 weeks prior to the application deadline. This listed director had never worked on a climate-related case in his career. And the cherry on top, the entire section on community engagement was lifted almost word for word from a state report I helped co-author last quarter. It wasn't fraud, but it was hollow. And under South Carolina's advisory board rules, any firm applying for a grant of this size had to demonstrate both legal expertise and a demonstrated record of impact in renewable energy advocacy. Montgomery and Pierce had neither. Still, I might have sent the file back for revision till I looked again at the lead signatory, Richard H. Montgomery. That was the line. As a board member, I was obligated to disclose any direct personal ties that could bias my review. Family firms were strictly prohibited from receiving funding while a relative held a voting or oversight role. I didn't need to ask myself what to do. I clicked through to the portal, opened the official conflict disclosure form, and filled out the necessary fields. Conflict of interest identified. Yes. Nature of relationship. First-degree family member, father. Recommendation. Disqualify per eligibility clause 4.3b. I read it over once, then twice. Then I hit submit. That was it. No announcement. No fallout. Just a quiet entry in a spreadsheet, followed by a polite automated email to the firm. Thank you for your application. After a review by the advisory board, we regret to inform you that your proposal has been deemed ineligible for consideration due to a conflict of interest. And lack of qualifying experience in the proposed practice area. I imagined my father reading that, his brow furrowing, his pride flaring. Maybe even blaming some junior associate for the rejection. He wouldn't know, of course, that the disqualification came from me. And I wouldn't tell him. Because this wasn't about him anymore. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even closure. It was simply justice. For once, I wasn't reacting. I wasn't defending my choices or trying to be heard or proving that I mattered. I was just doing my job, the job I had earned on holding the line. Later that night, I sat on my back porch with a mug of peppermint tea and opened my journal. The wind was light. The ocean was calm. I flipped past pages filled with late-night sketches. Anxious thoughts. Milestone checklists. Fragments of courage I'd collected on bad days. And then, on a fresh page, I wrote : He built a legacy of control. I built one of impact. Its name opens doors in courtrooms. Mine lights homes across continents. We are not the same, and I'm finally okay with that. I closed the notebook and exhaled. Not with sadness. Not even with pride. It's just peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you don't need the last word. You already had the final say. My phone buzzed. Naomi, hey, she said without preamble. Guess who just requested a partnership meeting? I didn't even have to ask. Who? She let the name hang in the air like a smirk. Alyssa. The article came out on a Wednesday. It wasn't the first time my name had shown up in national press, but this one felt different. The Atlantic. Full feature. A deep dive into Bright Haven's model, our international deployment strategy, our long-term energy equity impact. They called me one of the most influential voices in decentralized infrastructure. The word influential made me laugh. Influence wasn't the goal. Access was dignity, autonomy, things you can't always measure in market returns but can see instantly in the eyes of someone who flips on a light switch for the first time in their life. After the article dropped, my inbox flooded. Conference invitations, policy roundtable requests. Few schools even asked if I'd consider honorary degrees, something I found amusing given how my academic story ended. And then, out of nowhere, came an email from an address I hadn't seen in over a year. From Caroline.Montgomery. Subject. No subject. Body. I saw the article. I'm proud of you, even if I never said it before. That was all she wrote. It's those two sentences. I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an invitation. But it was something. Crack in the silence. Quiet shift in a lifelong pattern of watching without speaking. I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I closed the laptop, set my phone face down on the counter, and walked barefoot out to the deck. The late afternoon sun was starting to dip, casting gold across the surface of the water. It shimmered like it was alive. I took a breath and let it all settle in. The girl who once spent Thanksgiving dinners rehearsing polite answers just to survive her father's expectations. She didn't live here anymore. The woman standing in her place wasn't chasing anyone's approval. Not anymore. I thought back to every time I'd bitten my tongue to keep the peace. Every time I'd made myself smaller to fit into someone else's version of success. Every year I tried to earn a seat at a table that was never really built for me. I don't regret any of it, not even the pain, because it taught me how to build my own. Now, I advise on global energy policy. I speak at climate summits. I mentor young women who are where I once was, full of ideas but surrounded by doubt. I no longer walk into rooms wondering if I belong. I walk in knowing I'm needed. And still, I'm not angry with my father. He did what he knew. He built his legacy one case at a time with precision and power, but control was always the foundation. I couldn't grow inside that. I didn't need to destroy his legacy. I've just had to stop letting it define mine. The sky turned orange, then deep violet. Few stars began to blink through. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and sat at the edge of the deck, legs curled beneath me. My phone was still on the counter, still buzzing, I'm sure. I didn't reach for it. For once, the world could wait. There was nothing left to chase, nothing left to prove. Just this moment, just this piece. I used to think the best revenge was proving someone wrong, but now I know. The best revenge is waking up every morning in a life you chose. One built not out of rebellion, but out of truth. Not in their shadow, but in your own light. And the best part, didn't have to shout, I didn't have to win anyone over. I just had to become the kind of woman I used to be afraid to be. And in the end, the best revenge was living fully and freely on my own terms.